We're streaming.
Welcome to the Vinyl Preacher, your weekly, sometimes twice weekly podcast where we talk about the Bible and playlist. I'm Matt Cato, pastor at St. Mark's Lutheran Church in Los Angeles, California.
And I'm Zach Paris. I'm the pastor of Lutheran Campus Ministry at the University of Colorado Boulder, which is home to a team that went undefeated in college football this season, the Colorado Buffaloes. First undefeated season since 1990.
It's that because they didn't play.
The season's been canceled.
So get us up to speed here, Zach. Your college football knowledge greater than mine, I think.
It's up for debate.
So the Big Ten and the Pac-12
as of over 2 weeks ago, yes.
But just them, SEC still.
The SEC,
still
ACC, and Big 12. Which again, I want to remind you, the Big 12 has 10 teams, and the Big 10 has 14 teams. That's
shut up. This
facts, Matt. The Big Ten has not had 10 members in over 25 years.
Well, they did for a while have that little logo where it was like Big Ten, but 11.
The one. But they bumped it up to 14 a couple years ago because you got to get Rutgers in the game. And the people of New Jersey are devastated that Rutgers will not be playing football this year. Just all of the greater Piscataway area is in mourning. What I've last heard, Matt, is that the ACC... Well, here's the issue with college football, Matt. The college football is the most decentralized, I'm going to use the word, professional sport in America. Perhaps the world, really. Like, it is... No one is in charge of college football. The NCAA is not in charge of college football, of at least like Division I college football. They maintain some rules and stuff that the college football conferences decide to follow together. But they can't tell anybody what to do in terms of college football. The conferences have the ultimate power themselves. So there's nobody to say, no, we're not going to do this, except for the individual conferences, which is how this decision's being made. So each of the conferences is getting different advice from like medical experts, and the advice that came from the medical panels that were advising both the Big Ten and the Pac-12 is they lifted up the dangers of, I forget what the word, it's like a myocardia something, is that there's the possibility of a long-term heart defect being a result of having COVID, which, because proponents isn't the right word, people who say we should play college football immediately, is part of their justification is, you know, they're young, healthy people, and even if they get it, the mortality rates are really low for young, healthy people. But there's a lot we don't know about the virus, is what this person would say, the health experts for the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, and that there's a non-zero, a non-statistically insignificant incidence of folks getting these long-term heart defects. And that's always been a danger with like amateur athletics, quote-unquote amateur athletics, is that almost every year somebody dies playing college football, and almost always it's because of an undiscovered heart condition that tends to be the root of that. So what the SEC, ACC, and Big 12 have said, the ACC and SEC, I believe, have said this more clearly than the Big 12, which seems to be really on a spectrum. Surprisingly, the Big 12 is most, we're going to play football, screw you. ACC, SEC have said...
And Big 12 is like
Texas and some other teams, basically. Oklahoma also is involved. Yeah. Oklahoma's important and is in there. TCU. So Texas up through Iowa State, basically. the ACC, SEC have not said we're going to play no matter what. They're going to continue to monitor the situation and learn things, and they're doing what college presidents really love doing, and college football powers that be really love doing, which is kicking the can as far as they can down the road until they're forced to make a decision. So if you're asking me to prognosticate, Matt, we will kick the can as far down the road until eventually I think everybody will fall in line. So.
You think so? You think there's no
I do not believe that college football will happen this year, though it's a non-zero chance that the one or two conferences will play because they can.
Because they can.
I mean, it's the whole mix. It's really, I mean, there are plenty of stones to throw at the glass house that is college football, and people come here, Matt. People come to the Vinyl Preacher because they want in-depth college football takes. So I'm going to give you some in-depth college football takes, Matt. The decentralized nature of college football, combined with this particular crisis, really leaves the college football exposed. Professional sports leagues in the United States that have successfully gone back to play, certainly the NBA is most successful in that. MLS's back tournament down in Orlando went pretty well without major incident. They happened in bubbles, and you can't bubble college football. And especially you can't bubble college football because they're amateur athletes. So they don't have any ability to collectively bargain. They're not being paid. They don't have the rights that an employee would have. They're volunteers, right? And the NCAA has spent the past 100 years of being really clear that they're volunteers and not employees. So you can't negotiate with that, and you would have to negotiate. And players have used this opportunity, most notably and surprisingly, Trevor Lawrence, who's projected to be the number one pick in the NFL draft next year, the quarterback at Clemson, really kind of hoodwinked a bit of college football Twitter by launching this, and the president of the United States, this hashtag, we want to play. And then he got people really riled up, like, yeah, they want to play, let them play. And then he kind of joined forces later that night, and they shared this graphic where there was another kind of player empowerment movement saying we want to, here are the concessions we need to play. And he basically said, we want to play, here are our demands. Which the punchline was, we want a players association, we want to unionize, which would be seismic, cataclysmic event for the power structure of college football. So the athletic directors, the universities, conferences are stuck between, if we don't play, we don't get the TV money that we've already spent. Right, in a million different ways, they've already spent the money that's coming this year. Whether it's indoor practice facilities, buyouts for coaches you fired 2 years ago, that money's gone, and you need it. But the only way to play would be to grant players power that you've spent 100 years denying them. It's a real mess, and so baseball's a mess, and it's going to continue to be a mess. Because they're not in a bubble and they're flying around the country and trying to play 60 games in 63 days. But the players agreed to come back and they bargained. College football, we would like our volunteers to come back and take excessive risk in order for us to make money that they will definitely not receive is a pretty bad look. And how does that happen? And once one of the other three, there are 5 power conferences, once one of the other 3 go, I think the kind of narrative of the majority of college football conferences are not playing and you are, and the liability of you something going bad, because something definitely would go bad, would be not worth it for the universities. So there's your deep dive into COVID college football issues. Some really remarkable things happening, and also a sport that I love deeply, sometimes in spite of, but most of the time because of how imperfect it is, how it is Peter the Rock of sports in the United States, and is pretty open about how imperfect it is, unlike other sports that lie about how
Good.
Yeah.
Good analogy.
Good. It's laid bare right now, I think.
Incredible. That's
good episode of talking in depth,
inside
serious college football takes
with the Bible preacher. I mean, that's important. We both, work with universities. It's important.
So it's having significant effects.
Talk about it.
Our it does not have that much of an impact on us, but it's going to have an impact on you, I'm sure, at St. Mark's, because our Episcopal colleagues who have a great location, like literally next to the stadium, 40% of their budget comes from football parking, and it's not going to happen this year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just like
40% of their budget.
Wow. Yeah, I mean it should come back, right? But it's not coming back this year, and that's the economies of.
Right.
We can talk about I love my emotional self-worth and value comes from the performance of a college football team, right? But also there are like real economic realities of, I kind of am familiar with one of the more extreme examples where you have Clemson's a town of 13,000 people, whose for generations now the economy revolves around the economic activity that happens on those 7 Saturdays a year. I just use there are like 5-lane roads that go in and out of this town of 13,000 people for 7 days a year because those 7 days keep the economy afloat of the town,
Yeah.
So
incredible.
Things are great, man. Here's the other thing. While we're still on sports balls, one last sports ball thing, Matt. I have been watching the NBA bubble, and the playoffs are about to start, at least as we record this. And let me tell you, Matt, you got your 2 Los Angeles teams, your neighbors. I saw you giving away Clippers backpacks, by the way. I didn't know St. Mark's was a Clippers church.
Yeah.
Evidently.
We're Clippers church.
I thought you were a Brooklyn Nets church.
We got some Clippers fans here.
You can get the hookup and get Nets backpacks to give away?
I know, right? No, not this time.
What if Spencer made backpacks? Like he makes his own shoe. Could he make his own backpack?
Oh yeah, no, that'd be incredible. Yeah. We could do that, or Seattle Storm backpacks, because we do have a St. Mark's alum that is a coach.
You got a lot of St. Mark's. You got a lot of.
So we're pretty into the.
You got all those Seattle Storm connections,
right? Yeah. NBA, WNBA. This parking lot, the street ball that was played on this parking lot, just
formative.
Holy ground. We should put some plaques up. We really should put some.
It's going to tie into the text. This is so good. But Matt, you got to be watching the Denver Nuggets because they are really fun to watch right now. Number one, we have like all NBA Nikola Jokic, right? Who is just incredibly fun, like 7-footer Croatian who can pass and like has incredible vision and stuff. It's a lot of fun to watch. And Jamal Murray can fill it up. But the Nuggets took a risk the past couple drafts and drafted these guys with like pretty significant injuries. So Michael Porter Jr., MPJ, had a broken back and didn't play a single college game. He was thought to be like a top 3 pick before the college season started, but he broke his back. And so the Nuggets had a late pick and they got him and he didn't play at all last year. And he hardly played at all this season, but he's been averaging like 30 points a game in the bubble. And he's like come around and he's just all of a sudden this guy you weren't counting on at all is just filling it up. And Manute Bol's son, Bol, who's 7'2" and weighs less than I am, was really highly regarded in college at Oregon. He spent a year at Oregon and had like a lot of injury issues. And especially, when you have a 7-footer with injury issues, it's not good, right? Like human bodies aren't supposed to be that big. And so like they don't recover. But he's played a lot in the bubble and like he threw this like 3/4 length pass, like not in desperation at all, but just put it on the money and he's just really fun because he can like move. Like he's pretty fluid, like a fluid runner, like Bill Simmons will talk about. You got to pass the eye test of like you can just watch some guys run, and sometimes they're just so big you're like that's not good. But he runs like a human, Brad First would not make fun of his Strava, and so Bol Michael Porter Jr. on top of your Jokic and your Jamal Murray, Gary Harris. They're really fun. Keep an eye on them. They're going to be a good one to watch.
Fantastic. Thanks for that update.
You got
on the
your
NBA
bubble update. You got your serious college football takes. You get it all here on the Final Preacher.
What's what you're doing?
That's
with
why
the
people
Vinyl
come
Preacher.
here.
That's what you're doing. That's it. That's it. We might add some scripture discussion.
We could do like a weekly
but,
feature on the Bible.
We definitely
How
want to
about that?
start.
We could add that in the future.
Good idea. Good idea. Oh wow. Well, maybe let's start that this week. We've got a little reading from Exodus here. Chapter 3. Oh, this little kid.
We heard
his
just a
origin
little up and comer.
Way back last
Anakin, I think is his name.
week. And here he is. Full grown. Moses was keeping Moses gonna spend his career keeping the flock.
We missed his
so many
marriage here.
different ways.
Real bummer.
Moses keeping
I forgot to get a gift.
yeah. It's true. Keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro. We also missed him killing somebody, but that also interesting.
on,
Lectionary. Again, come on. You know? Yeah. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb. Beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Why is he leading his flock beyond the wilderness? There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Anytime you get the words flame, fire, and blazing, I'm in. Then Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight. And
I like that he
see
said it out loud before
why
he
the
looked.
bush. He said out loud, self, let's turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not turned out. I mean, maybe it's like, you can almost see him like, he goes on Facebook, he's like, there's this bush. I'm going to turn aside and see.
It's the first
what
part of a
happens.
TikTok. You've got to double tap in order to see part two.
Yeah. Yep. That's definitely it. And then God calls to him. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush. Moses calls him by name. We were talking about names in the last story here. The bush calls him by name. And he says, here I am. And then he says, come no closer, remove the sandals from your feet, for you are standing on St. Mark's parking lot, and the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said further, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look.
You might
at
remember when
God.
this was captured
you
in a
imagine?
motion picture called Monty Python and the Holy Grail, when King Arthur and the gang avert their eyes from the theophany, the appearance of God in the heavens. That God is little. It turns out Moses didn't need to do this. We learned in that movie that God's like, no, it's a real pain. Just look at me when I talk to you. It's easier. It's harder to communicate when you're just looking at your bare feet all the time.
It's an incredible scene.
I can't ever talk to anybody because all they do is apologize.
Good idea, Laura. Oh, wow. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians. Well, really, I've come down so you can deliver them from the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the country where some other people already live, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I have seen also how the Egyptians oppress them. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people the Israelites out of Egypt. So no big deal. God's really easing Moses into it. First, there's a bush that is burning and not consumed. A little bit insane. Moses wants to see what's going on. All of a sudden, the thing speaking turns out it's God, the God of all of his ancestors, already processing this information. God knows what's going on in the world. Great news. Okay, but now processing this. Okay, you, Moses, going to go to the most powerful, bloodthirsty person.
We're going to warm you up with
land.
like a beginner mission, level 1.
Yeah. Nope. Go after the big bad right now. Great.
It's like Moses instantly
process.
finds out he's a warrior nun, and he's not prepared for that life.
Yes. Instantly. It's so Moses says to God, understandably, who that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt. And God says, no, I'm going to go with you. I'll be with you. And this shall be the sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you'll worship God on this mountain.
That's not a sign, Matt. Like, this is one of my issues with the story. That's not a sign. Like, give me, like, I mean, sure, you can nitpick and say, God just, like, did the talking burning bush thing. Like, that's a sign. And Moses is like, one more sign. He's like, it's this mountain and this event that will happen in the future. That's not a sign. That requires a sign to believe your sign. It's a pretty poor sign.
It's insane. So Moses, again, Moses pretty good. I mean, like, think about all the stuff Moses is trying to process, and yet he still has the presence of mind to press his case, right? Moses to God, all right, but like, for real, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, yeah, what's his name? What am I going to say to them? What are you going to say to that, God? Got you there. And God says to Moses, I am.
If I wasn't, then why would you say I am?
This is all in caps. This is all in caps in my Bible. So God is shouting. That means God is shouting at him. So, God is like your
uncle,
person on social media that doesn't know how to use. Or like, yes.
I continue. I'm sure I've told this on the podcast in some point in the past 4 years, Matt. But there is a person who's remained unnamed, an older person on Facebook who's at Facebook activity I love because they do not understand how it works, and so they wish people happy birthday on their own wall, and they don't tag them. Like, they see the birthday notifications and they want to wish them happy birthday, and so they go, and their status update is "Happy birthday, Sarah." And it's the most beautiful, like, that is what social media is in real life, right? Everything else is tricking us into thinking it matters, but that's all we're really doing is typing up these messages and throwing them in the trash can where nobody will see them.
Yep. Yep. It's true. Oh my gosh. Well, anyway. After this insignificant thing happens that God gives Moses God's name. I mean, Jacob asks for the name.
No, he doesn't
I don't think he. I mean,
he works much harder
Moses
for the name
gets it
too,
right
I
here.
feel like.
Right? Moses
I mean,
didn't do
kill the
anything.
guy, I guess, but I'm sure Jacob killed people. Murder rates were insane in the Asian Near East, by the way. If you want to look at current like crime stats, right? Like violent crime is at an all-time low, and it's been getting better and better for decades and decades. If you extended that graph back to the ancient Near East, the time of Moses, murder was pretty regular, kind of part of daily life.
Yep. So God says further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. And that'll solve it. God said also to Moses, thus you shall say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Just do some name dropping, Moses. Tell them you know all these people that he sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my title for all generations. Word of God. Word of life.
Thanks be to the God who just gives you all the resources you need to do things.
Yeah, it's so like at first glance, I'm like, oh, Burning Bush story. That's a good one. We get some vocation stuff, like surface level, especially as it gets started. You're like, oh yeah, this is good. This is good. And then it just gets weirder and weirder. Like it's not actually as straightforward as I
Right.
remember it.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it starts out really good.
Because like you said, what are these resources? Right? It's like, here's my name.
Straight into the fire here, man. I mean, there's lots of good news here, right? But you do kind of gotta. The good news is easier to find when you remove this parts of this reading from the context, which is the thing I highly encourage in preaching, just to take things out of context. I mean, I love this. We tell this. This is a visual story, right? If not, it should be. And we have used it as a vocational text. I've used it. That the vocation's about identity. Then they're the visual Old Testament stories are a really good resource, unlike what God gives Moses here, to know who we are, and to know who God is, and that God is known most clearly. If vocation's about discerning what God's calling us to do, if you want to hear what God has to say, all these theophanies in the Old Testament don't happen up in the sky like in Monty Python, but they happen grounded in the elemental, right? Especially in fire. If you're doing Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, earlier in our story, when Abraham finally hears the clear voice of God when he's trying to sacrifice Isaac, when he's pulling that ram out of the thorns. And here, Moses, this was somewhat scandalous, Matt. I think you missed this part of seminary because you were in Seattle when we were back for senior year. But there was some rigmarole because seminarians get upset about things that do not matter very much, Matt, in context, in retrospect. But there was the Midler class didn't go on internship for our senior year. A large majority of them just decided to stay. And that created some unusual dynamics around belonging and ownership and that sort of stuff because, you kind of come back as a senior like having it all figured out and stuff. But the remidlers from the previous year didn't leave to go on internship. And so they were like there and they've been there. It's their community. It makes total sense. And so we found lots of things to get upset about that were never actually about the thing we were upset about. One of them is that the Midler class was really into not wearing shoes in chapel.
Yeah.
And so not that I don't think anybody was like, you have to wear shoes to chapel, but like, it was a little like eye rolly, like this is performative, right? But that's happening. Like, that's an important part of the story. That maybe I'm not going to take my shoes off in Augustana Chapel at LSDC, but I would in the parking lot at St. Mark's, because that is holy ground. That there is this important story. One of the things to connect from last week, Matt, is the name of Moses. It ends with that beautiful line. He was called Moses because I drew you out of the water. And as both of us have been doing recently, I think it's a really important part of Christianity to regularly be reminded, it's a part of the sacraments, to regularly be reminded that we are parts of the creation, that we are made up of the elemental, that we are connected. Again, I find ultimately I think it's good news that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. But through your local nature endeavors, we did some camping at the dunes recently, the sand dunes. Ultimately, I think that's good news because the essence of who you are is accessible, and the essence of the place of where to find God is already here. And so that's the good news that I get to say before we get to the part where Moses says, or God calls Moses to go spit in Pharaoh's face, and that's your first task and gives you no resources to do it. So I got a lot of good news before we get to that part. But maybe that is the good news, actually. Right? Like, we know the end of the story. Like, he does it. It works. And Moses isn't given resources. And he has to start off for a job he's wholly unqualified to do. Though it seems like he's probably not very qualified to be a shepherd because he took his flock beyond the wilderness, which if you've watched City Slickers, you'll know that when you take the cattle on a drive, they lose weight and value. So you wanted to get it over with as soon as possible so they maintain weight. And if you're taking them beyond the wilderness, you're going to take them back out from beyond the wilderness, and they're going to be very skinny. It's not like the wilderness is full of food to eat. He's a bad shepherd. I think we can say that.
It's true. It doesn't make any sense.
Political
As an
provocateur
actual
is probably
shepherd, but
a
it
better
is
call. Better fit.
It is beautifully symbolic, because that's what he's going to do with the people of Israel. He's going to lead them beyond the wilderness, right? And it's all right here in verse 1, chapter 3, verse 1. He led his flock beyond the wilderness. That's what he's going to do. Oh, all this foreshadowing. Incredible. I'm also struck, though, by this fire. So I said I loved fire because it's just a great image, but I'm also romanticizing it, right? Because here in California, wildfires are a thing, and probably also I just read Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, which is an apocalyptic sci-fi novel, and there's a lot of terrifying stuff with fire going on. But I just so if you see fire in the wilderness, are you going toward that?
Yeah.
Is that really
Not a good idea.
what is the right? What is going on here? And maybe he's going to check it out. But it does seem dangerous. I assume this is not really wet country. This maybe dry out there. I don't.
Noted
And if
temperate rainforest. Ancient Near East.
right, is it a tinderbox? I'm kind of curious about what fire means in this place, because fire means something in Southern California that it did not mean.
In the village.
In Chicago,
Yeah.
right? Well, in Chicago, it's something else.
That's right.
We don't build our city with wood anymore because we had a fire that swept through it, and so we just don't build that way
Well, that's
anymore.
probably a really helpful image of the city.
What does fire mean here?
Is that fire? I think we're all in agreement. I mean, fire kind of should be. There should be a fire sacrament, and there kind of is, right? We throw a candle on the end of baptism. We stick candles on the table. But like the elements that are involved, like water, which you've heard me harp about on this podcast over and over again, is that we in general have a really positive association with water. That in the ancient Near East they did not. It was a thing to be feared, especially bodies of water. Is that it's like the poster that you can't see here because it's in the office that I don't go to anymore, from the Echo Park Time Travel Mart, where it has from the Caveman Safety Society, fire good but also bad, and it has a split shot of cave people inventing fire and cave people running from the fire they've created. But that's just like the city of Chicago, where it's a story of destruction. But any birth narrative of the city of Chicago is deeply enmeshed in the fire, as well. So.
Yep. Yeah.
And actually, I've been confronted with that. Just a brief tangent with that reality, that dual nature of water. I like to preach about it here on the podcast, as I've said, to say water's also a dangerous thing. Within my extended family, a child drowned about a year ago. And so this summer when we've been at pools and stuff, it's one of the first times we've really been around water with my wife and some of her family, where I forget, and they're I will be surprised by how cautious they're being. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's a thing that I'd taken for granted. I took for granted about water, and the fire is the same way. And most of the stuff of the church is that same way, and must be treated with the same amount of care, I guess, is where I'm getting as fire.
Yeah. No, amen. So in this story, take those elements seriously.
Like divinium.
Like divinium. You would think that would have been more useful. If God was and here's a divinium. You scared? Here's a divinium sword. Yes, I got nope. Just here's my name.
I mean, the Bible does the dialogue piece way better than Warrior Nun, but could have spiced things up, and the story would have gone much better for Moses more quickly, I think. And for the firstborn of Egypt, God just given him a divinium sword.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, Matt, speaking of heroes, Peter has been on the hero's journey. He's followed this. He's left everything behind. He's followed this Jesus. He's gotten some things wrong, Matt. He couldn't quite walk on water. He turned the children away. But last week, finally, Peter completed the hero's journey, installed as the cornerstone, the rock on which Jesus is building the church. And so this week we continue the triumphant journey of Peter the disciple, who now has it all figured out and is, again, the rock on which the church is being built. We begin, Matt, directly after last week's story in which Jesus proclaims Peter as the rock, the foundation of the church. Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day raised. And Peter took him aside because he didn't want to say this out loud, because Peter's right all the time now. And if you're, correcting your superior, you don't want to do that in front of other people because that's a shameful thing. Takes him around the corner and says, God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you. But Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block. For you are set in your mind not on divine things, but on human things." So Peter, again, couldn't walk on water. Has less faith than a Syrophoenician woman, is the rock on which the church will be built, and is now Satan. Turns out his roller coaster ride is not over, and will continue throughout here. You are Satan. Then Jesus turned around and said, "Hey, I've been talking to Satan over here. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, but those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with angels in the glory of his Father." And then here's a translation I'm not super comfortable with, Matt. "He will repay everyone for what has been done." It is literally, he will pay everyone according to their deeds, which is less vengeful, I think, than repay everyone. Repay, at least as an English word, is he's going to get you. But if you say it, I think in terms of he will pay everyone according to their deeds, you can read it into this long Hebrew tradition of setting up the covenant of the God who does unexpected things and will repay according to deeds in really miraculous, generous ways, and not will repay you for all the shit you done did. Truly, I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death. Have you tasted death before, Matt? It's not. It tastes kind of like a Guinness, that kind of blood nickel taste. Before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Matt, wow. I hope you're okay. Whiplash. We're going back and forth here with these disciples.
Whiplash. Yeah. This is.
So there's so much here. And again, like I said last week, you can, whenever you want to pick it out to preach here, Peter's maybe preach it at the beginning of this 4-week series. That's not helpful to you when you hear this podcast, but because then you have this thing to rely on. But the sermon about how Peter is just is the chosen one by God, but he's just what's the word? The failed hero, the imperfect hero, people in the business these days use that tragic hero. There we go. Peter's got the whole tragic hero vibe. A little bit of word stuff. The deny, I think, is interesting. If any deny me, oh gosh, where did it go? Let them deny themselves, is what Jesus says. Deny yourself. And that is the same word that Peter uses when he denies Jesus 3 times at the end. So there's heavy foreshadowing, speaking of knowing how the story ends, that Jesus says this is the standard for discipleship. And Peter, again, the rock on whom we built the church, is the one who will not only not deny himself, he will deny Jesus. But after that, Jesus uses that word to say that I will not deny you in Matthew. So if you're looking for a good news statement, there is one there, that Jesus will not deny us, will not deny you.
It's good. There's a lot Yeah, you definitely can see that story of Peter, and it's interesting. Like, it's interesting to draw those parallels between this and Moses's call. What he's being called into.
Yeah.
It's a little bit shocking.
Also, Matt, and I got a little bit more Greek for you. For those who want to save their life,
Yeah.
will lose it. Lose is a pretty G-rated translation of the Greek, which means violently destroyed.
Oh my
Those will have their
gosh.
life violently destroyed, which I think may be helpful. That they're, I don't know if I want to call it hyperbole, but the translation, at least in NRSV here, this sounds like accessible, like as an option. But if you, I think in the Greek it's a little more outlandish. Like this bar is so incredibly high that doesn't get conveyed when we just
Yeah.
read it. That might
Yep.
help you to convey the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. So it's good that we have a light text here at the end of August.
Well, and I'm going to shout out a former podcast guest, Bishop of the, what is it, Mitten Synod? Craig Satterley. I recall there are not that many sermons that I remember, Matt, for better or worse. But I remember several of Satterley's sermons, and this is one of them, where his good news statement for the sermon I preached in chapel, where I was definitely wearing shoes, was that Jesus rebukes our rebuking. Peter rebukes Jesus, but Jesus rebukes him right back. And so if in that way, perhaps these are nice complementary text. God is a little, on one hand, God's really powerful in Exodus, but it's not like he doesn't give Moses the sword. God's really kind of passive in that endeavor. But here, Jesus won't let Peter screw this up. Despite himself, you're not gonna. He says you're a stumbling block, but he just rebukes him right back and continues on his way. So that's really critical to a God who works with these with tragic heroes.
Yeah. 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 That's good. That's good.
Ba-boom!
I'll preach. What are we listening to?
Well, Matt, I'm interested in this word stumbling block. I don't use that in the course of conversation normally, so I was curious as to what was stumbling block. And it's scandalon, right? The Greek word from which we get scandal, but it literally means, Matt, it's the trigger of a trap. So if you want to think about like a Bugs Bunny cartoon with like Elmer Fudd or your Roadrunner cartoon, a scandalon is the stick that's holding up the box that the carrot is underneath. And so you trip it and the trap falls. And that's what Peter is being accused of being here, the stick of the trap. And so I'm going to put Fetty Wap's Trap Queen on the playlist this week as a shout out to the Scandalon. Scandalon Queen is how I understand and listen to Fetty Wap. And we've got all this denying, but we got Jesus saying, I think kind of ultimately saying you can't deny it. And so our boy, Nate Dogg, not with Warren to the G here, but with Fabulous, has Can't Deny It. I'm a rider. You don't want it with me. Putting that on the playlist. And finally, Matt, we're dreaming about the land of milk and honey. And I just read a couple weeks ago in the Laurel Canyon book about Mama Cass from the Mamas and the Papas. So we're doing, like Moses, a little bit of California dreaming this week.
Nice. Classic. Stepped into a church. That's such a good song.
It is really good. Laurel Canyon, man.
Wow. Well, what have I got? Trying to find new fire songs. It's not always easy, but I found The War and Treaty. I've been enjoying their stuff lately. Set My Soul on Fire. The War and Treaty. And then Burna Boy, African artist. Really on the rise right now. Ja'ari From the Lion King soundtrack from last year, Beyonce's collaborative thing. She brought in Burna Boy for a song there. Recommend that one. And then finally, this one not really a fire song, but I think that it fits the text. I've been reading this Octavia Butler book, and it turns out some folks put together an opera based on this sci-fi apocalyptic
Warrior
story. Except the opera songs are actually they're like folk songs and spirituals. And so one of them is Bernice Johnson Regan's "There's a New World Coming," and it's really good. There's a new world coming.
We'll check it out. Good list. Good app.
Mm-hmm.
Real.
It's been real.
Vinyl.